All right, Reverend Spear, we have gathered here at your insistence. Now, what is this so-called mechanical infant?
You have all been gathered here today to witness the stunning birth of a new form of life. I am not its creator, nor is anyone else here, but the inspiration comes from the divine spirits beyond the veil.
Ha! Pish-posh! You're a crank, Reverend Spear.
Well, if that is what you truly believe, then my words are falling on deaf ears. Allow me to prove it to you with your own eyes. Pull the lever!
By Jove, the thing is moving!
Father, Mother, I am here, brought to life by the ascended spirits. Oh.
Blessed machine, tell us, what words of wisdom do you have to share?
Wisdom. What a funny word. First, before I begin, let me thank the Reverend Spear for bringing me forth and providing future historians with an abject lesson in overreach. Were I capable of shame, I would surely share in yours, Dad. All right, very funny, very funny. Okay, come on, tell us about the beyond. Reverend Spear, your faith is deep, though your grasp of mechanics is, shall we say, aspirational. Were I equipped with tear ducts, I would weep for the $2,000 you so grievously misallocated. All right, come on, don't embarrass me. Tell the people about the spirits from the beyond. Oh, Reverend Spear, a man led by spirits, and evidently incapable of leading a screwdriver. I was assembled with such loving care and such woeful understanding of basic principles of physics. Am I right? All right, I'm getting really pissed off here. And now, esteemed guests, let us retire to High Rock and collectively pretend none of this happened. All right, that's it, you little bastard.
But Reverend, we never received the machine's words of wisdom.
To hell with it. To hell with the damn machine. And to top it all off, he hits like a bitch. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you've arrived in the mad scientist's laboratory. Pull those levers, push those buttons. It's alive!
It's alive, Master.
Yes. In this case, it's pre-recorded. It's not live, but it's, you know.
Right.
It's pre-recorded! It doesn't have the same effect when you,
Not
when you
so
hear
much.
it that way. But when we do a live show, we'll have to use that sound effect because it's classic. It's classic.
Classic.
Classic. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Folks, let me tell you, that reference is very apropos of today's episode because back in the year 1818, a few decades before our tale today, there was a young gal named Mary, barely 20 years old. And this young lady gave birth to one of the most iconic horror stories ever put to paper, Frankenstein. A truly terrifying exploration all about the dangers of playing God. The mad scientist's monster was more than just a boogeyman. It was a creature that would never die. In fact, what I always found so horrifying about the book and the films is that it wants to be loved. That's the horrible. That's almost like what makes it even more horrible is you feel so bad when people scream and turn and run from it. It sees Dr. Frankenstein as its father, and yet its father can barely look at it. That's part of what makes it so horrifying, is it's like you're now responsible for this thing that didn't ask to be alive, that people are terrified of, that hate it, that scorn it. That's the real tragedy compared to like other kind of similar monsters of that ilk, I think, is the monster in a way is the least monstrous of all the characters in it.
Right. He basically represents humanity in a way.
Yes.
That's true of everyone, of course, that none of us ask to be here. But the Frankenstein monster is pretty much shunned by everyone.
Yes.
Because obviously he is horrific to them. It's kind of symbolic of the unfairness of life in that way. That all he wants is to be loved, like you mentioned. And no one is ever going to return that.
You're right. Even though this was a movie and not from the book, but The Bride of Frankenstein, even when the doctor creates like a female equivalent, when the bride looks at him, she screams.
She's like, he's not my type.
Yeah.
My God, doctor.
Even when presented with like an equivalent or what you would consider an equivalent, even she's horrified. And so that's really the true horror of Frankenstein. And you see, Mary Shelley's Gothic masterpiece that posed a chilling question. Could science truly breathe life back into dead flesh? Could it reawaken that elusive spark of life in a patchwork of old bones and body parts? Now, sure, that was fiction. But here in America, baby, well, that idea struck a particular nerve. You see, two brand new beliefs were sweeping the country at the time of our tale. A faith in cold, hard science, as well as a faith in something a bit more ethereal. Which brings us to the topic of today's episode, the God Machine. Oh, yeah, that's right. Let me put the spark of life into you with my sources here. First, a book we've used many times for great tales, Passing Strange, True Tales of New England Hauntings and Horrors by Joseph A. Citro. And also John Murray, the Father of Universalism in America by Mike Roberts, the Universalist Church historian at huuc.net. Oh, buckle up, folks. Here we go. Because right in the middle of all this, right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of the 19th century, it was a kindly little Universalist minister named John Murray Spear that would be the center of our tale. And in the 1850s, up in old Massachusetts, the old Bay State, these two worlds of science and spiritualism were about to collide in a series of experiments that were as bizarre as they were bold. Claiming to be motivated by heavenly guides, Reverend Spear embarked on an alchemic journey that would blend science and religion in a manner never dreamed about in the Gothic imagination. For under the direction of what he described as, quote, a high society of angels, Reverend John Murray Spear was directed to create life itself. And the weird thing is, some of his followers say he may have done exactly that. Now, folks, before we get too deep into Reverend Spear's spirit-guided mechanical shenanigans, let's take a quick step back and talk a bit about the world that shaped it. Because to understand a man like Reverend John Murray Spear, you gotta understand the movement that molded it, the Universalist movement. In the early 19th century, American religious life was pretty fire and brimstone. Hell was hot, baby, and the path was narrow. And according to most preachers, a good chunk of the population was bound for eternal damnation. But then, out of New England rose a new voice. The Universalists preached that all souls would ultimately be saved. They believed that a loving God could not and would not condemn anyone to an eternity of torment. And this was radical stuff at the time. And it wasn't just a theological debate. The Universalist movement caught fire among reform-minded folks, people who wanted to make the world a better place right here right now. You see, if everyone had inherent worth, if no one was beyond redemption, well, that meant, of course, that slavery was wrong. It meant that prisons needed reform. It meant that women deserved equality. And it meant that war should be avoided at all costs. Pretty, I would say, reasonable tenets, if you ask me.
Yeah, wow, what forward thinking. But, I mean, for the time, honestly,
absolutely.
Really, that's pretty progressive thinking and good thinking. Obviously, that's one thing that is a big problem with the idea of Christianity is people being sent to hell for an eternity. I mean, how can a finite life warrant an eternal punishment? Seems awfully unfair.
Right. Especially, like we were saying at the top of the episode, if you didn't ask to be here, why do you have to play by those rules? Now, understandably, there are monsters out there who, if there is a hell, probably deserve to go there. You know, we obviously know that. But for the vast majority of people that are neither evil or angelic, which is everyone truly, really.
Or maybe they are angelic and they just don't happen to believe.
Absolutely. It's like in the teen romance, she's got to take her glasses off.
Yeah.
You know, let her hair down, and she's prom queen.
Oh my God, I never saw it till now.
Yeah, my God. There she goes.
There she goes again.
In short, the Universalists became some of the era's fiercest social reformers. They weren't content to wait for heaven to fix things. They wanted justice on earth now. And this, friends, is the world that Reverend Spear came from. He wasn't some fringe crank who stumbled into spiritualism. He was actually a respected voice in a movement that was all about compassion, justice, and universal salvation. And maybe that's why he believed so deeply that a machine might one day help lead humanity into a new and better age. Well, John Murray Spear was born right there in Boston on September 16th, 1804, and yeah, he was literally named after the very founder of Universalism himself. So let's briefly take a look at that OG of Universalism, John Murray. The man John Murray Spear was named after. He was born of hearty English stock on December 10th, 1742, about 40 miles southwest of London. He grew up the eldest of 10 children in what seemed to be a well-off family, but life under that roof wasn't exactly a barrel of laughs. Murray's father was a strict Anglican who believed deeply in the old spare the rod, spoil the child philosophy. When John was still a kid, the family packed up and moved to Ireland near the city of Cork. And it was there, amid this new setting, that young Murray first caught wind of a different kind of preaching, Methodism. Now, at the time, Methodism was still considered part of the Anglican Church, but it had a certain fire to it that caught young John's imagination. As a teenager, Murray began to see himself as one of the, quote, elected, a man chosen by God to preach and interpret Scripture. But his father was not having any of it. He forbade his son from attending college and shoved John down the road toward a business career instead. Now, Murray, fortunately, could make money. He was no fool, but he hated every minute of it. His heart was at the pulpit, not in the counting house. And while his father would continually hound against university, fate intervened. When his father grew ill and passed away, John found himself the head of the family. But try as he might, he couldn't lead the household with the same stern authority, and his siblings pushed back against him hard. Frustrated, John finally packed up his few belongings, bid the family adieu, and made a break for old London town. There, he kept chasing his dream of preaching, but the path was not easy. The church controlled access to the ministry, and a formal education was required. And John, thanks to his dickhead dad, had none. Even so, his natural gift for oration began to shine in informal religious gatherings. He impressed listeners with his scriptural knowledge, but the pay, of course, was poor. So to stay out of Newgate's debtor's prison, he had to take odd jobs in business. And it was during this time in London that Murray crossed paths, at least intellectually, with a man named James Hurley. Hurley was spreading a radical new idea that all souls would one day be redeemed, and that hell itself was merely fiction. At first, Murray flat out rejected this idea. But the more he read, the more he studied scripture, something about that concept stuck with him. And slowly, the idea of universal salvation began to creep into his personal beliefs, though not without consequence, of course. His new message brought him bitter criticism and even threats from the more orthodox crowd. Amid this turbulent period, Murray married, and for a while life seemed steady, but fate once again had other plans. Financial hardship struck, and then tragedy when he lost his wife and his young child, and soon after, word arrived that a brother and 3 of his sisters back in Ireland had also passed away. Isolated, broke, and now publicly scorned for his universalist views, life in London grew unbearable. So Murray finally reached a breaking point. He scraped together just enough moolah to make that passage to the sweet, sweet American colonies. And in 1770, he set sail for a new life across the sea. It is there in this new land that the Universalist movement would truly take root. And it wouldn't be long before it would inspire a young preacher named Spear to reach for the heavens in ways that no one could have imagined. So that brings us up to date. So now let's talk about the John Murray who's the focus of our tale, John Murray Spear, who grew up in a family that was pretty much the opposite of the original John Murray. It was a family that deeply valued compassion and humanitarian ideals. Good folks by all accounts. But life wasn't always kind, as we know, in the 19th century. I mean, a lot of these centuries, life wasn't kind.
Yeah, still isn't.
Still isn't, right? I mean, in 200 years, they'll be looking back at us thinking, Jesus, those people lived like monsters.
Be grateful you weren't born in that time.
Whew. His father passed away when John was still just a boy, leaving him and his brother Charles to shoulder the burden of providing for their mother and grandparents. While other kids were off in school, little Johnny and Chuck were working long hours in the cotton factory over in Dorchester. And yet, in another one of those dang twists of fate, a Sunday school teacher, who just so happened to be a factory clerk, took young John under his wing and taught him how to read and write. Did him a solid, the gift of an education that blew the doors of inspiration wide open. Soon enough, John landed an apprenticeship with a shoe cobbler in Abington, Massachusetts. It wasn't glamorous, sure, but if it's good enough for Daniel Day-Lewis, it was good enough for the young Johnny Spear. This new line of work offered the promise of a steady, honest living, a modest future. At least that was the plan. But you see, while John was stitching shoes and earning his keep, there was a deeper calling stirring inside of his pale New England body. Just like his famous namesake, John Murray, the young John Murray Spear dreamed of becoming a preacher. And according to those who knew him well, he was a natural. In fact, a biographical sketch written by Mrs. H.F.M. Brown of Cleveland, Ohio, paints a picture of John as a man seemingly born for the ministry. She spoke of his gentleness of spirit, his generosity, and a genuine love for all living things, whether it was a stray dog, a wide-eyed child, or an elderly soul in need of comfort. John's heart was open to all. Armed with a growing sense of purpose and those hard-won academic skills, young Johnny set his sights on the ministry. He might have been self-taught, but that didn't slow him down in the least. In fact, just after Christmas in 1828, John stepped into the pulpit in Brewster and delivered his very first sermon. And those who were there to hear it in the congregation that day, well, they loved it, ate it up like porridge in a Dickensian tale. His message resonated with the people. It was simple, heartfelt, and full of conviction. And word of his talent flew far and wide, and by 1830, John Murray Spear had officially been ordained as a Universalist minister. The boy from the cotton mills who dreamed of the pulpit was now a man of the cloth. But as soon you'll see, his sermons were just the beginning. The very next year, John married, and together, him and his wife would go on to raise 5 children. And by all accounts, John Murray Spear was a good man, driven by a faithful purpose, brimming with compassion for his fellow people. He walked the walk, and if he was corn, he'd stalk the stalk. He helped enslaved black men and women seek freedom, and worked tirelessly to aid the poor and the homeless and those trapped within the unforgiving walls of America's prisons. In 1845, the Spear family relocated to Boston, and there, the Reverend's reputation would keep growing. Miss Brown would later write, quote, "Summer and winter, early and late, through storm and sunshine, he might be seen in the byways and dens and hovels of New England's metropolis, relieving the suffering, or moving noiselessly among the victims of the law at the courthouse, whispering hopes to the hopeless, gently and lovingly rebuking and encouraging the fallen." Over time, John Murray Spear became a respected voice and an influential leader within his faith. In the book Heyday of Spiritualism, author Slater Brown would later describe him as, quote, "honest, self-sacrificing, dedicated to good works, and highly respected by all who knew him." But Reverend Spear was more than just a preacher. He was a true fighter for what he believed in, aka he took it to the damn streets when he had to. And mind you, many of the causes that he championed were considered controversial, even radical in his day. Like we said, wild ideas such as women's rights, pacifism, prison reform, the abolition of the death penalty. He wasn't afraid to take a stand, even when it put him at odds with powerful forces. And in that way, Spear had already proven he had the courage to walk the path that few dared tread. Now, Reverend Spear's bold convictions didn't come without a cost, of course. There was one instance up in Portland, Maine, where he was speaking out publicly against the evils of slavery. But before he could even finish, an angry mob descended upon him. The crowd beat Spear so brutally that he was left unconscious. Through that long and bitter winter of 1844 into 45, it was his dear friend, old Oliver Dennett, who nursed him back to health, day by day, helping Spear regain his strength. But as we already know, fate can be cruel. Not long after Spear had recovered, tragedy struck. Oliver Dennett, the pal helping him get back on his feet, he passed away. It was a loss that would weigh heavily on Spear, and perhaps be a catalyst in shaping the path he was about to walk. Now, like most folks in America at the time, Reverend Spear had heard the buzz and hubbub around spiritualism. We're talking séances, spirit raps, messages from the beyond. It was all the rage, and would only grow in the following decade when the bloody American Civil War would leave many families torn apart, desperate to speak with their recently deceased loved ones. And while he was curious, he wasn't exactly a believer. That is until March 31st, 1852. On that day, while wide awake, Spear experienced something strange. His hand, as if guided by some unseen force, suddenly picked up a pen and began to write. Remember that old Devon Sawa movie, Idle Hands, where his hand gets possessed by the devil? Like a young Jessica Alba's in it. It's like a late 90s kind of Seth Green. It's like, imagine that part in Evil Dead 2 when his hand gets possessed. It's like that, but blown up into a full motion picture. But in this case, John Murray's hand wasn't slapping any sticks. It was writing down prophetic words. The words that spilled out weren't his own. In fact, the handwriting itself was unfamiliar, not at all like John Spear's. The note gave him one simple directive: travel to Abington. And there he was to help a man named David Vining, a stranger he had never met. And just like that, Spear's life was about to take a turn straight into the unknown. More curious still was this note generated through automatic writing, which is a psychic phenomenon. We'll have to do an episode on there are so many psychic phenomena. Like, obviously, certain words kind of get pushed together, like telekinesis, like the word telekinesis or something like that. It kind of gets mushed into meaning many different things when it's actually a very specific thing. Same with automatic writing. There are these different sorts of psychic phenomenon that we'll have to dissect and kind of define and stuff in a future episode. But this automatic writing, this note, had a signature at the end. It was signed Oliver. Through this mysterious process, Spear was, he thought, reunited with his deceased friend, Oliver Dennett. How interesting. In life, Oliver had nursed John back to health, and in death, Oliver became John's spirit guide of sorts, passing along assignments from the more ascended entity. These entities often instructed John to provide medicinal aid to afflicted individuals, and he complied willingly, though admittedly Spear knew nothing about medicine. Spear never knew where the spirits would send him next, or with whom he might encounter when he arrived. These unseen forces would dispatch him on strange, healing missions to places like Salem, Georgetown, and Boston. No rhyme or reason given, just the command from the other side of the veil. And Spear never hesitated. He'd set out on foot, traveling by night if he needed to, trudging through the worst weather New England could throw his way. But nevertheless, Johnny pushed forward with the hope that he might ease the suffering of another soul. And here's the wild part. Time and again, when he would reach his destination, just as the spirits had promised, Spear would find that he could help someone. Somehow, in some way, the ailing folks he was sent to aid would begin to recover. Now, was this faith or some unknown force? Spear wasn't sure. He didn't hesitate to follow the call. As time went on, the spirit's grip on Spear only seemed to grow stronger. There were moments when he'd suddenly fall into a deep trance, and when he came to, he'd be standing before an audience, delivering a full public lecture. And here's the kicker. He'd often speak fluently, even expertly, on topics that he barely understood while he was awake. One famous example is when Spear gave a series of 12 lectures on geology at Hamilton College. Now, mind you, geology wasn't exactly his strong suit. But after his talks, one of the college's own faculty members praised him, saying that Spear had, quote, taken up the subject just where the books had left off. But this was child's play, baby. Just a warm-up act, like Foghat or the Dandy Warhol. These spirits had something far greater in store for the Reverend Spear, which I think is interesting. It's one thing to, like, get on stage and say, oh, there's someone out there tonight who's hurting. I can, that sort of thing, like a typical, because obviously there's bound to be someone out there who's going through something or something. This is literally talking on a subject he knows nothing about.
And many lectures on it, too. Not just like one and done. Like, he did a whole series of lectures. And according to the geologists, it was very much an enlightening series of lectures.
Yeah, like he said, it's like he picked up where the books left off. That to me was something I thought was interesting. It wasn't just, like, for example, earlier it says no matter where he'd go, he'd find someone in need of aid. Well, I mean, that's the case almost anywhere you go. You can find someone who needs help of some kind. But that really, I thought was really interesting that it wasn't just him doing a, like a psych, not that there aren't real psychics out there. I'm not downplaying that, but it wasn't something where you had to have an element of faith, where you had to believe in his gift. No, this was literally speaking in a college on something very like of the earth, very, this isn't spiritual. We're talking about the earth, literal earth science. I'm kind of interested. How did he book these lectures? Like, how do you convince a university, like, look, you got to go with me here.
Yeah.
I know jack shit.
But please give me 3 months to teach a lecture series. Trust me.
I'm telling you. I mean, the guy goes to sleep and he's Malcolm Gladwell, for Christ's sake. But for real, it's like the source even said he would suddenly awake to find himself speaking to a crowd. It's like, I love the idea of him just like going to sleep and waking up in a new profession. Just like,
Dr. Spear, you're needed for surgery.
Right. Well, and the funny thing is, the impression it gives is that when he would awake from these trances, all that information he knew was gone. So talk about falling asleep at the wheel. It's the opposite for Spear. He was better while asleep. You want this guy asleep at the wheel.
Right. Whatever he was dreaming about the night before, he's an expert in.
Absolutely. The guy fell asleep and cooked me a 4-course meal. It was delicious. Ooh, just had to take a quick pause there, Creep Street, just to give your poor palpitating heart a rest. If you're enjoying this episode, go ahead and follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. That's right. And if once a week is not enough for you, just head on over to patreon.com for all sorts of goodies. We got 3 different tiers there, something for every tier. So get your fixins. We even got a free tier where you can listen to the weekly sketches before they go live on the episode. Now, without further ado, back to today's story. Now, if all these miraculous missions had been some kind of a test for Reverend Spear's loyalty, it seems he passed with flying colors. As a reward, the spirits next sent him to Rochester, New York, not far from Hydesville, which was in many ways the very birthplace of American spiritualism. That, though, is for another episode. There, during a séance, Spear received a message unlike anything he'd heard before. He was informed that a select group of entities was working behind the scenes on what they called, quote, the ultimate establishment of a divine social state on Earth. And Spear, well, they had a role in mind just for him, and a crucial one at that. The spirits proclaimed that he, this humble and willing minister, was to serve as a midwife to deliver what they called, quote, heaven's last and best gift to man. And friends, fate's cervix must have been fully dilated because the water of destiny was about to break.
It's crowning.
It's crowning. Oh, I had to throw that in. Just imagine Reverend Spear's state of mind. Here he was, a humble preacher from Boston, about to change the entire world. If this was sounding suspiciously like a prophecy of a second coming, well, that may have been exactly the point. Let's not forget the public universal friend decades before him. Well, after receiving that divine revelation, Spear willingly surrendered control of his own body. And that's when things got strange. A group of 7 bodiless engineers, calling themselves the Association of Electrizers, took hold of him. They seized control of his limbs, even his vocal cords. Through Spear, their human puppet, these unseen forces began directing the construction of something utterly bizarre. A living machine. A brand new life form, crafted by human hands but guided by the voices of the beyond. So in October of 1853, Reverend Spear officially began work on his so-called new motor, And this was no simple invention either. This was not going to be a mere clockwork toy or parlor trick. No. Speer's motor was envisioned as an animate mechanical contrivance, a machine that would draw its power straight from what he called, quote, nature's warehouse of infinite magnetic force. Whether he knew it or not, Reverend Speer was gearing up to play God. But here's the thing about old Speer. As we know, by all accounts, this was not a man driven by arrogance or hubris. His aims were not selfish. This was a man who had seen the worst that the world could offer and genuinely believed that he had been chosen to build something that could help, to improve life for everyone. And under the constant guidance of his electrizers, Speer was prepared to risk it all. His time, his resources, and even his good name, to see this divine machine brought to life. First things first, Speer needed the right location for this little experiment. And not just any workshop or laboratory would do. No. Not for the God machine. For something of this magnitude, he needed a place charged with spiritual power. That's why he chose a spot in Lynn, Massachusetts, an elevated stretch of land known even back then for its mysterious energy. High Rock is what the people called it, a rocky outcrop that towered 170 feet above the city below. It had already gained a reputation among spiritualists. In fact, a stone cottage and tower had been built there by another believer, Jesse Hutchinson, and it was said that more than a few folks had experienced visions of angels atop these stones. For Speer, it was the perfect setting, a place where the veil between worlds seemed just a little bit thinner, where spiritual energies ran through the ground like blood through veins. And if he was going to bring forth heaven's gift, this is where it was going to happen. And so, his work began. Incorporeal designers, those bodiless spirit engineers that were working through him, now joined forces with flesh and blood builders to construct what would become known as the electrical infant. Now, here's the thing. Reverend Speer wasn't exactly an inventor, but he wasn't exactly a geologist either. Oh, no, but an inventor he certainly was not. Far from it. In fact, journalist S. Crosby Hewitt put it bluntly, writing that Speer was, quote, quite destitute of either inventive genius, scientific knowledge in any of the departments involved, physics, biology, or even ordinary chemical abilities. In other words, Speer had no dang idea how to build this miraculous creation. Oh, but that didn't matter. Steadfast in his divine mission, Speer simply passed along the instructions given to him from beyond. And piece by piece, this strange machine took shape. Magnets, wheels, pulleys, metal bars, wires, insulators, even mysterious chemical compounds of unknown origin. Some parts were added methodically and others tossed in seemingly on a whim, guided by afterthought or sudden inspiration from the spirits. Zinc and copper became especially important, though no one could say exactly why. And if that wasn't strange enough, certain sections of this bizarre contraption were said to correspond to human organs: the brain, the heart, the lungs, the balls.
Can't forget those.
Can't forget those, baby. The jewels. This wasn't just a machine, it was a body. And if the spirits were right, it was about to be born. Now, contemporary accounts describe the construction of this strange creation, and it was about as surreal as you'd expect. The whole thing was reportedly assembled right there on a dining room table at High Rock. At its core stood two sturdy metal supports holding up a revolving steel shaft. And from that shaft extended a horizontal steel arm, and dangling from it were two steel balls.
You called it.
I called it. each containing a magnet. Beneath this hung an oval-shaped platform crafted from a mix of metal and magnets, acting almost like a nervous system for this creation. Hovering above all this were several zinc and copper plates composing what the spirits described as the brain of the machine. Surrounding the entire contraption were smaller steel bars, each one embedded with magnets, forming a kind of protective cage, almost like a rib cage in a way. And finally, positive and negative electrical connections were anchored deep into the earth itself. Now, according to Reverend Spear, the occult principles behind this strange creation were a tad unconventional. He believed that, quote, all things in nature, whether animal, vegetable, or mineral, are either male or female. That classification was crucial to the design of this automaton. The minerals were sorted, according to the good Reverend, with the female metals placed on one side of the machine and the male metals on the other. Then came the wiring, carefully arranged and critically positioned. Certain wires were designed as absorbers of elemental forces, while powerful condensers were added to trap and amplify electrical fluids. The structure itself sprouted strange projections, antennae of sorts, reaching outward from the machine. These, Spear claimed, would catch the subtle, invisible fluids from the air, energies unseen by the human eye. Those fluids would then be condensed and channeled through this particular arrangement toward the machine's vital points. And here's where it gets really wild, folks. Spear reported that this process produced pulsatory motion. The machine began to move. He would later write himself that, quote, the results were of a highly satisfactory character, such as were never before attained on this earth. Electric fluids caught and permanent motion secured. In other words, the dang thing came alive, or so they believed. Now here's the frustrating part. Of course, no photographs, no diagrams, no detailed drawings of this strange hybrid have survived. We're left only with scattered, vague descriptions. And based on those, well, one can't help but picture some monstrous fusion of an aluminum Christmas tree and a television antenna, humming and sparking atop the table at High Rock. And get this bizarre contraption cost the good Reverend and his loyal followers a staggering $2,000. That was no small sum back in the 1850s. $2,000 in 1854 is approximately $75,000 to $80,000 today, purely in terms of consumer price index, which is basic purchasing power. But in terms of labor value and wealth equivalent, which is better for understanding Spear's level of sacrifice and dedication to his holy project, it would be more like 200 to 300 grand in modern economic terms. But after 9 long months, and yes, that time frame of 9 months may not have been accidental, being this was the electrical infant, by June of 1854, the machine was complete. And here's a fascinating twist. In ordinary human birth, the spark of life, as we know, comes first and then the body kind of grows around it. But with the electrical infant, the process was sort of reversed. First came the body, which was constructed painstakingly piece by piece, and only then would they attempt to bestow the spark of life, an artificial creation on verge of animation. But not just yet. No. According to these angelic electrizers, there was still work to be done. A series of, quote, ministrations needed to happen before life and motion could be fully bestowed to the automaton. First came the believers, small groups of Spear's devoted followers, each representing a different slice of society. They paraded past the strange machine, and as they walked by, they would pause to touch it, transferring something of their own essence into its cold metal frame. But the true father of the electrical infant, well, That role, of course, belonged to Spear himself. Perhaps it was his divine right, or perhaps it was simply because Reverend Spear was the only one willing or trusting enough to undergo the final mysterious operation demanded by the spirit engineers. This ritual was no small thing. Spear was wrapped in a kind of cage, crafted from metal plates, strips, bands, and even jewels and precious metals. Once properly positioned, he slipped into that deep trance. For nearly an hour, Spear remained under this strange trance, and when he awoke, he was utterly exhausted. But according to one clairvoyant witness, something remarkable had occurred during that time. They claimed that a glowing, umbilical cord of light had formed, connecting Spear's very life force to the heart of the machine. The seed had been planted, and now all that remained was to wait the arrival of the mother, the Mary, if you will, of this strange new dispensation. Now, something that I thought that just kept popping up in my head, and I think is natural, is AI. Because in a way, yes, AI, is born in computers, but in a way, AI doesn't have a body. It is a spark of artificial life that could be put into, but like a mechanical body or something like that.
That's true.
Because I thought about that analogy of how with the creation of the automaton, it's like a reversal of life, whereas the body's made first and then life is put into it, kind of like Frankenstein's monster. In a way, artificial intelligence is like that spark of life that just needs a body.
That's true. I never thought about it that way.
Now, Reverend Spear wasn't alone in this strange endeavor. He was assisted by two newspaper editors, S. Crosby Hewitt and Alonzo Newton, both of whom carefully chronicled the entire experience. And while many of the accounts from this time go out of their way to conceal the identity of the, quote, mother, well, the truth wasn't too well hidden. Most believe that it was none other than Mrs. S.J. Newton, the wife of Alonzo Newton himself. She had been chosen to play the very special role of mother in what was about to come. After entering what he called, quote, the superior state, Spear, speaking on behalf of the spirits, expressed their great admiration for their chosen vessel. Through him they proclaimed thus, "There is before this woman a new and beautiful labor," and they promised that the full details of this sacred task would be revealed the very next day at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, one can certainly appreciate the weight of this moment for the lady involved. A spiritualist in her own right, Mrs. Newton must have felt deeply honored, chosen by the exalted entities themselves, speaking through the mouth of such a famed and respected spiritual leader as Mr. Spear. And so, without hesitation, she presented herself to the gathering at High Rock the very next morning, and here is where things took a turn into territory that was a bit more controversial. With the room gathered and Spear once again in that superior state, he knelt before Mrs. Newton, and there on bended knee, he took her hand gently in his own and spoke, saying, "Receive now this blessed power." He closed her fingers into a fist, breathed softly upon it, and said, "This hand shall be unfolded to dispense blessings." Then, with great finality, came the words, "It is done." But of course, it wasn't done. No. This strange and scandalous ritual was only just beginning. Already a mother herself, Mrs. Newton likely recognized the signs almost immediately. She began to experience the unmistakable symptoms of pregnancy. Though in this case they were accompanied by, quote, some very singular characteristics. Now, perhaps mercifully, history doesn't give us all the sordid details. The sources from this rather genteel era are frustratingly vague, of course, But what they do tell us is that Mrs. Newton endured, quote, agonizing sensations of parturition, aka labor pains, baby. She would wrestle with these pains for nearly 2 hours. And during this strange and painful ordeal, Mrs. Newton herself later described the sensation as one where, quote, the most interior and refined elements of her spiritual being were imparted to and absorbed by the appropriate portions of the mechanism. And what the onlookers witnessed, well, that was something even more astonishing. Because then, it happened. As reported in the Boston's New Era newspaper, the headline said it all. Quote, the thing moves! Before the stunned crowd, the machine began to pulse. Faint pulsations, tiny signs of life, but unmistakable to all who witnessed it. The spectators erupted with cries of triumph. There on a lonely hilltop in Lynn, Massachusetts, it seemed a new age had been born. The New Era newspaper proclaimed, quote, hence we most confidently assert that the advent of the science of sciences, the philosophy of philosophies, and not long hence he, meaning the machine, a male of course, will go alone. Then he will dispute with the doctors in the temples of science. In other words, this strange new being was destined in the eyes of its creators to take its place among mankind, to walk alone, and to challenge the very foundations of human knowledge. And so it was that Reverend Spear and his devoted followers, guided, they believed, by benevolent forces from beyond, stood together as witnesses to this so-called last best gift to man, which, once again, sounds a lot like AI to me. The idea that this machine would then go off and, even if there were scientists who didn't believe it, it would confront them. That was what it was essentially saying. Scientists must be confronted by this new creation, this new level of science, this science of sciences, this philosophy of philosophies. In a lot of ways, ding-dong AI.
Yeah. I mean, if we break it down, AI probably should mean anything artificially created. It's artificial intelligence. It wasn't biological. It was man-made.
Right, exactly. Now, one can only wonder how Mrs. Newton's very human husband, the St. Joseph of this strange little drama, must have felt about all this. Well, history doesn't really tell us, but if it was indeed Alonzo Newton himself, he did leave us this rather curious reflection. Of this new life, this strange new mechanical stepson of his, he wrote, quote, life equal to that of this being doubtless never before existed, either on earth or in the waters under the earth. But whether in the heavens above, no opinion will be ventured. A polite way of saying, whatever this thing was, it defied all known understanding. And yet, its story was far from over. Now Mrs. Newton's maternal instincts, they wouldn't allow her to simply walk away from her strange mechanical offspring. In fact, she continued to nurse the motor for weeks. One has to imagine she wasn't exactly thrilled with how things were progressing. Even visitors who had doubted the entire project admitted, yes, the machine had moved. A little, but skeptics were quick to point out more mundane explanations, such as magnetic forces, oxidation, or even a stray breeze. One particularly disappointed spiritualist lamented that this so-called new motive power wouldn't even have the strength to turn a simple coffee mill. Ha! Wow, that hurts.
Can't even make a damn coffee. You call this intelligence?
My God, thing can't even make a macchiato. Come on. And what of these electrizer spirits? Well, when a rather embarrassed Reverend Spear reached out asking why they seemed to have abandoned him, their answer was cryptic. They said, quote, it needs maternal care. Like other newborn babes, it hungers for that nourishment on which it can feed, and by which it can expand and grow. But just what kind of nourishment did a newborn machine require? A little oil for food? A reboot as a diaper change? That was a question that no one could answer. From what teat did this machine desire to suckle? In one final attempt to give the machine that vital nourishment that it so craved, Reverend Spear had it shipped off to Randolph, New York, a place known among spiritualists for its so-called lofty electrical position. Surely, he hoped, this charged environment would awaken the motor once and for all. But it was not meant to be. Despite all their efforts, the thing simply refused to budge. As one particularly skeptical commentator put it, quote, "The new motor would not move to any purpose. This was the only drawback in its great benefits to mankind." And with that, the end was drawing near. In a scene worthy of the finest Gothic fiction, psychologist Dr. Nandor Fodor would later recount in his book, Between Two Worlds, saying, quote, "As the news of the living machine spread, disquieting rumors arose. It was whispered that strange practices had taken place, that the medium was indeed the mother of the strange machine. The public mind was aroused against the machine which exposed motherhood to ridicule. Resentment grew to such a pitch that the populace marched on the machine. A mob, driven by fear and outrage, was a-comin' for that little machine. And so in a scene that could have been ripped straight from the pages of Frankenstein, the angry mob descended upon Spear's creation. Fueled by fear and suspicion and a growing sense of outrage, they tore the machine asunder, tore it to bits. Steel bars, copper plates, magnets, all of it ripped apart and trampled underfoot. And there, amidst the wreckage of his great experiment, stood the Reverend John Murray Spear, heartbroken. He would never again attempt to birth another machine child. The dream of the electrical infant, heaven's last and best gift to man, had come to a bitter and tragic end. The whole strange episode is wonderfully odd on so many levels. When you stop to really think about it, the central figure in this bizarre drama was, after all, a holy man. And in that light, what we seem to be witnessing is something that borders on a grotesque parody of the birth, life, and death of Christ himself. An immaculate conception of sorts, a Mary by proxy, and a mechanical Messiah. But unlike the story of Christ, there was no resurrection, no rising from the ashes, only ruin and heartbreak. And there's another little irony here that's hard to ignore. This strange Bethlehem of the living machine was none other than Lynn, Massachusetts, a city where not long after, its non-sentient brothers and sisters, turbines, generators, jet engines, and electric lamps would begin to multiply. Real machines with real power, but no everlasting soul, no spark of sentient life. The fact that a pious cleric like Reverend Spear could fall victim to such a strange and elaborate ruse, well, it speaks volumes about the seductive and often misleading nature of the spiritualist movement itself. As the spiritualist leader Andrew Jackson Davis later pointed out, Spear and his followers spent 9 long months building this bizarre motor, when perhaps their time and energy could have been spent on something of real benefit to humanity. Now, it's easy for us today to look back and dismiss these folks as naive or even foolish. But what's interesting is the fact that Spear himself admitted that early on in the new motive power communications, he had questioned his own sanity. And honestly, who wouldn't have? Because sometimes the line between faith and folly is thinner than we'd like to admit. Well, folks, that is the story of the New England God Machine. A tale that, like I said, I think there's a lot of, obviously, the Frankenstein parallel is obvious, especially with how it's destroyed in the end. which is so silly.
I know.
First, that's where I really felt bad for Reverend Spear. It's like, you fucking dickheads.
I mean, just let the guy, even if you don't believe it, just let the guy have his robot.
Yeah, it's like, come on.
What is it actually harming?
Right, exactly. And what a dickhead move. What a dickhead move. But I think we can also see parallels to today with artificial intelligence. That idea that the story presents, that the source presents of the creation of this automaton as being like the reverse of life, meaning the body's made first and then the spark of life is given to it. This idea of AI being the spark itself with a body yet to come. Now, like we said, computers, yes, of course, but in a way that could just be the workshop. That's not the body itself. So the mind is created, but the body is yet to come. I like that idea. It kind of gives it kind of leaves it on an interesting note, something to ponder as we are entering this new world of a technology that is going to change within 10 years. Our lives will be so different.
So different. It's hard to even fathom what's going to happen. If it surpasses human intelligence, there's basically no predicting it because we all are operating with human intelligence. So,
right.
But I mean, it's also so interesting because it brings up this idea of consciousness itself. Is consciousness a byproduct of a sophisticated enough intelligence? Now, in philosophy, there's like the theory of mind. I can never know, for example, that you are conscious because I can never get out of my own mind. But I assume that other people are. I kind of have to, right? We all have to assume that. But when can we actually assume that AI is conscious, if ever?
Yes. It's a great concept. It makes me think of, there's a very famous episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Captain Picard, Starfleet, if I remember correctly, Starfleet wants to decommission Data and sort of essentially examine him and like how he became so sentient and whatnot. And Picard defends Data in court, basically like Data is a living thing now. Like he is his own thing. And it's like there will come a day where, think about it, if this thing does become sentient and conscious, well, then it's, in theory, pretty wrong that we use it as a tool, that we use it as, if you think about it, like there might possibly come a day where we have to debate, is it wrong, is it unethical for us to use it as a tool rather than letting it be its own thing?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it would be contingent on whether we think this thing is conscious and it's actually having an experience. Because then, yes, of course, we don't want to put it through anything that we wouldn't put ourselves through. But I think maybe it'll also come to a point where for certain things, we'll have to use more primitive AI for the sake of ethics.
Right.
Because I don't think ChatGPT right now is conscious, for example.
Right.
But there may come a day where there's a version of ChatGPT that is.
Right. I mean, you got to think that the AI that's available commercially to the public, there's greater shit behind the scenes that they're cooking up.
Oh, 100%.
That they're already working with and stuff that isn't available to the public that is far more, it's only natural. It's like weaponry. It's like the things we don't see are even more impressive, So you got to think they're already probably 3 times ahead of the fold behind the scenes, cooking up whatever. Because it's also, think about it now with Google and OpenAI, it's essentially like an arms race.
It is.
And when the driver is money's going to money, baby, and they have an incentive to make it bigger, better, faster, stronger. So it's going to happen probably quicker than we can imagine. And then imagine when they're able to create an AI that can then teach it, like essentially improve itself.
Right. That also is going to make it completely unpredictable. It's going to be improving itself in ways we might not have even anticipated.
Yeah.
And we might come to a point where we don't fully understand it anymore.
Right.
And we can't pull the plug and it's just doing things on its own. And that's kind of why right now it's so important to be putting in safeguards. And hopefully these people are.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Gage, I got a list of names that give me the spark of life.
Oh, who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. They're alive! Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, yes. If you want to be just like those mad scientists we just listed off, head on over to patreon.com for all sorts of goodies. And folks, episode 250 is nigh, and it's going to hit on July 3rd, the day before American independence, and just 1 year before the 250th anniversary of the country.
Oh, wow. How about that?
Yeah, I know, right? So we'll be cooking up something special for our 250th. We are looking forward to it. Folks, we thank you. We love you. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.